Tonight, the latest developments demand your full attention. And once you hear this, you'll understand why. Just hours ago, behind closed palace doors, King Charles III quietly signed a royal warrant of appointment, one of the most significant orders issued in over 3 decades. And Catherine, Princess of Wales, didn't just know about it. According to senior palace sources, she shaped it. She influenced it from the ground up. And the reaction inside royal circles has been nothing short of seismic. If you like and subscribe right now, you won't miss a single update on this story, because it is moving fast. Before we dive deep into what this order actually says and why it matters so much, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. What is happening inside the royal household right now is unprecedented, and this is exactly the kind of story that doesn't always make it to your regular news feed. You need to be here for it. And here is my question for you. After you hear everything I am about to tell you, do you believe Catherine's growing influence over the crown is the best thing that could happen to the British monarchy right now? Or do you think this kind of behind-the-scenes power shift sets a dangerous new precedent that the palace should never have allowed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. Strong feelings on both sides of this one. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will have something very specific to say. Now, let me walk you through what happened, and why what looks like a quiet administrative order may actually be one of the most consequential decisions Charles has made since his coronation. This isn't just another royal headline. This isn't just paperwork being shuffled around inside Buckingham Palace while the rest of the world goes about its business. Royal warrants of appointment have existed for over 500 years. 500 years. They are the formal mechanism by which the Crown signals trust, values, and priorities to the nation and to the world. When the Crown grants one, it is saying, this is who we trust. This is who represents our standards. This is what we stand for. Since the reign of Henry VIII, yes, back to the 1500s, these warrants have functioned as a seal of royal approval that carries enormous commercial, cultural, and symbolic power. Queen Victoria used the warrant system to reward British craftsmanship and manufacturing during the height of the Industrial Revolution. Queen Elizabeth II expanded it to reflect modern Britain, not just tradition, but innovation. In 2012, she quietly introduced guidelines requiring warrant holders to demonstrate environmental responsibility. That was a significant shift at the time. Most people barely noticed it, but those who study the monarchy closely understood exactly what it meant. And now Charles has signed a new order that changes the criteria again. Fundamentally, here is what you need to understand. Charles has been on the throne since September 2022. He has had nearly 3 years to reshape how the warrant system works. Until now, the changes were relatively minor, streamlined administration, a leaner approach, quiet adjustments. But this order is different. This order touches something deeper. And here is where it gets really interesting, because multiple senior palace sources are now saying that Catherine was not just consulted on this decision. She drove the conversation. She pushed for specific language. She advocated for priorities that, according to royal analyst and author Roya Nika, reflect a clearly forward-looking vision of what the crown should represent over the next 50 years. Let that sink in. Catherine, who has spent years carefully building her public image, navigating serious illness, supporting her husband, raising 3 children in the full glare of public scrutiny, has now stepped into a position of genuine institutional influence. Not ceremonial influence. Not symbolic influence. Real, documented, on-the-record influence over a formal royal decree, and the palace has not pushed back on a single word of this reporting. Let me walk you through exactly what is in this order, because the details matter enormously. The royal warrant of appointment update signed by King Charles includes 3 primary changes. First, it introduces a new category of eligibility focused on sustainability and ethical sourcing. Second, it raises the minimum supply period required before a business can apply from 5 years to 7. And third, and most significantly, it creates a new external advisory panel to oversee the application process. That panel, according to a Buckingham Palace briefing document released Monday, will include representatives from environmental, charitable, and community sectors. That third point. Think about that for a moment. For 500 years, the warrant system was managed almost entirely by royal household officials, an entirely internal process, insulated from outside perspectives. Charles has now opened a formal channel for external advisors to shape which businesses and institutions receive the Crown's endorsement. That is not a minor administrative tweak. That is a structural change to one of the oldest mechanisms of royal power in the world. But here is where it gets really interesting, because Catherine's fingerprints are all over the advisory panel idea specifically. Royal biographer Robert Hardman, who has written extensively about the inner workings of the palace in books including Queen of Our Times, The Life of Elizabeth II, told reporters this week that the advisory panel model closely mirrors work Catherine has championed through the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Since 2021, Catherine has quietly built the foundation into one of the most evidence-based, outcome-driven royal charitable operations in modern history. She insisted on measurable results. She pushed for partnerships with universities and research institutions. She wanted proof that the work was making a real difference, not just good intentions, but documented impact. And now that exact philosophy, evidence, accountability, external voices, has been written into a formal royal order. Let that sink in. And it doesn't stop there. The sustainability requirements in this new order also echo the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which Charles launched while still Prince of Wales in 2020. But insiders are pointing out that the specific language around ethical supply chains and community impact goes further than anything Charles had previously proposed. Several palace watchers have attributed that language directly to Catherine's early childhood policy work. Her multi-year research project through the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, which she launched in 2021 and has expanded methodically every year since. Dr. Mary Dixon Woods, a leading policy researcher at the University of Cambridge who has collaborated with Catherine's team, has publicly described the princess's approach as rigorous, patient, and deeply committed to evidence. Those same qualities are now embedded in a royal decree. Think about what that means, but here is what will really make you think. This order was signed quietly. No press conference, no fanfare, no announcement designed to grab attention. The palace released a brief statement, 87 words, and attached the full 14-page document as a download on the official royal website. That was it. Now ask yourself, why would one of the most consequential changes to the warrant system in a generation be announced so quietly? According to multiple sources who spoke to the Times this week, the decision to keep this low-key was deliberate. The palace did not want this to become a political story. They did not want debate about the monarchy overstepping. They wanted the order to take effect before criticism could mount. That tells you something. That tells you the people inside that palace know this is significant. They know this changes things, and they made a calculated decision to move fast and say little. And it doesn't stop there. Because within 12 hours of the document being published online, 3 sitting members of the House of Lords had already submitted formal questions about the new advisory panel, specifically about how members would be appointed, who would oversee them, and whether they would be subject to any parliamentary scrutiny. That is fast. That is unusually fast. Lord David Pannick Casey, one of the most respected constitutional lawyers in the United Kingdom, was quoted on Tuesday saying the creation of an external advisory panel attached to a royal prerogative function raises, in his words, legitimate and interesting constitutional questions that will need to be carefully worked through. A change quietly shaped in part by Catherine, Princess of Wales, has prompted constitutional commentary at the highest levels of British public life, within 24 hours of its release. But here is where I need you to really pause, because underneath all the legal language and the constitutional debate, there is a deeply human story happening here, and it is a story about someone who almost wasn't here to see it. Less than 18 months ago, Catherine was diagnosed with cancer. She stepped back from public duties. The palace issued careful, measured statements. The world held its breath. Millions of people, including many of you watching right now, genuinely worried about her, not because she is a princess, because she is a mother, because she is a person. Because over the years you have watched her show up with grace and warmth and dignity in a role that demands an almost impossible standard. She came back, and she didn't come back diminished. She didn't come back simply to fulfill engagements and smile for photographs. She came back with something to say. Let that sink in. The advisory panel idea embedded in this royal order wasn't drafted overnight. Palace sources who spoke to the Times this week described a process that began during Catherine's recovery. Months of reading, months of thinking, months of considering what the monarchy needs to look like for the next generation. Her children's generation. George, Charlotte, Louis. While she was recovering from a cancer diagnosis, Catherine was thinking about how to make the institution her children will one day serve more accountable, more credible, more connected to the world as it actually is, not as it was in 1950. Think about that for a moment. And there is something else, something the headlines have largely missed. Among the new eligible categories under the revised warrant criteria, there is explicit recognition of organizations working in mental health support and early childhood development. Those are not random categories. Those are the two areas Catherine has devoted the most personal energy to over the past decade. The Heads Together mental health campaign, the early years research, the advocacy work. She didn't just influence this order as a palace insider. She influenced it as someone who has spent years building the public case, with research, with data, with genuine commitment, that these issues matter to the life of the nation. Royal historian Dr. David Starkey once observed that the British monarchy survives not because it is powerful, but because it is meaningful. Meaning, he said, is what gives the crown its authority in a democratic age. Catherine appears to understand that observation at a very deep level. The comments pouring in on official palace social media accounts since Monday evening have been extraordinary. People writing things like, "She has worked so hard and she deserves this recognition." And this is what the modern monarchy should look like. And simply, Diana would be so proud. That last one keeps appearing. Diana would be so proud. And you understand why, because Diana herself fought inside that same institution to be heard, to have her voice matter. To take what the crown represented and point it toward the people who needed it most. She didn't always succeed. The institution pushed back. It was painful and public and heartbreaking. Her son is now king. And his wife, who has worn Diana's jewelry, who has honored Diana's memory with consistency and grace from the very beginning, is now shaping royal policy in ways Diana never had the chance to. That is not a small thing. That is not a footnote. That is history. So what does this actually mean for the future? And I want to be clear that this question goes far beyond the palace gates. The British monarchy is at a crossroads that historians will study for a very long time. On one side, you have the argument that the crown's enduring power comes precisely from its separation from ordinary politics, its mystique, its distance, its unchanging rituals. On the other side, you have the argument that an institution which cannot demonstrate relevance to ordinary people in 2026 will not survive the reign after next. This order comes down firmly on the second side of that argument, and the implications reach further than the United Kingdom. In Australia, where the Republican debate has never fully gone away, commentators are already noting that a monarchy which demonstrably adapts, which holds its commercial relationships to higher ethical standards, which invites outside scrutiny, is considerably harder to argue against than one that appears to exist only to preserve privilege. The Sydney Morning Herald ran a piece on Wednesday under the headline, "Is the Palace Finally Doing the Work?" That is a significant shift in framing from a publication that has long been skeptical of the Crown's relevance in Australian life. In Canada, similar conversations are happening. The question of whether a distant hereditary monarchy can be genuinely meaningful to a multicultural, 21st-century nation has been alive for years. But when the Crown begins aligning its formal structures with values that Canadians broadly share, sustainability, accountability, community impact, the conversation changes. Here is the comparison that puts everything in sharp perspective. In 1953, when Queen Elizabeth II was crowned, there were 800 active royal warrant holders in the United Kingdom. By the time of her death in 2022, that number had fallen to approximately 400, a drop driven by consolidation, changing consumer habits, and a deliberate pruning by the palace under Elizabeth's careful guidance. The warrant under her watch became more selective, more meaningful. Charles is now taking that in an entirely new direction. Under the revised criteria, the question is no longer simply, have you supplied the royal household for 7 years or more? The question is now also, do you meet standards of ethical practice, environmental responsibility, and community contribution that the Crown can publicly and proudly endorse? That is a fundamentally different proposition. It is the difference between the Crown as a customer and the Crown as a statement of values. And Catherine's influence in driving that shift is now part of the formal record. Royal commentator and broadcaster Juliet Reedon, writing in The Week this month, described what is happening inside the palace as a quiet revolution driven by a woman who understands that institutions only survive when they earn their place in each new generation. That is a precise and important observation. Whether you believe the monarchy should exist at all, and that is a completely legitimate debate, you have to recognize what is happening here. The institution is not standing still. It is moving. And the direction it is moving in has Catherine's signature on it, even if her name doesn't appear in the document itself. Personally, I think what we are watching is something genuinely significant, and I want to be careful not to overstate it, because this audience deserves honesty, not hype. Catherine is not running the country. She is not a prime minister. She does not have legislative power. The Crown's formal constitutional role in the United Kingdom is narrow and carefully bounded. Nothing about this order changes any of that, but influence is not the same as power. And what this order reveals quietly through the details is that Catherine has built something more durable than a public image. She has built credibility inside the institution, with the king, with the officials who draft these documents, with the researchers and advisors who shape the palace's long-term thinking. That credibility came from years of showing up, from the early years' research, from the mental health work, from the disciplined, patient, evidence-first approach that palace sources now describe whenever they talk about how she operates. She didn't arrive at this moment overnight. She earned it. And I think most of you watching, whether you have followed the royal family for decades or came to this story more recently, you recognize what earned credibility looks like. Because you have lived long enough to know the difference between someone who talks and someone who does the actual work. Catherine has done the work. But that's just my take. And now I genuinely want to hear yours. Here are my questions for you, and I want specific answers in the comments. First, do you think Catherine's growing role in shaping palace policy is a sign that the monarchy is finally modernizing in a real and meaningful way? Or does it concern you that someone unelected is having this level of influence over formal royal decisions? Second, do you think King Charles was right to sign this order? Or should a change this significant have gone through a more public and transparent process before taking effect? And third, when you look at the full arc of Catherine's story, from the early years of intense scrutiny through her illness to this moment, what does it say to you about the kind of person she genuinely is? Drop your answers below. I read every single comment, and this is exactly the kind of conversation this community does best. And if you haven't already, please subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because this story is absolutely far from over. There are still unanswered questions about how the advisory panel will be appointed, how the new criteria will actually be enforced, and what all of this signals for the next phase of Charles's reign and beyond. We will be covering every development as it happens. If you found this deep dive valuable, share it with someone who cares about the royal family, about British history, or about how great institutions change and either survive or don't. This is the kind of story that deserves a wider audience. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.